When my mother stood up during my college graduation ceremony and announced to 4,000 strangers that I was a worthless disappointment who would never amount to anything, I thought my world had crumbled. But as I fled that auditorium in tears, I never expected to find Agent Marcus Williams waiting by my Honda Civic with a badge, a knowing smile, and information that would turn my family's dark secrets into the headline story of the decade. What started as the worst day of my life became the beginning of the most dangerous investigation I never saw coming. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Rebecca Chen, and this story begins on what should have been the proudest moment of my 23 years. Instead, it became the day I learned that sometimes your biggest betrayal comes wrapped in the person who gave you life, and sometimes salvation arrives wearing a federal badge and carrying secrets that will shatter everything you thought you knew about the people you love. The spring morning of my graduation from Portland State University dawned gray and drizzly, which seemed fitting for Oregon but felt ominous given how tense things had been at home. I was graduating magna cum laude with a degree in computer science and cybersecurity, achievement that had cost me 4 years of 18-hour days, juggling coursework with 3 part-time jobs. My parents, Catherine Chen and businessman Robert Chen, had always made it clear that paying for my education was my responsibility, despite their obvious wealth from my mother's successful dermatology practice and my father's import business. The ceremony was held in the university's largest auditorium, packed with excited families and proud graduates. I had managed to secure 5 tickets for my family, though I wondered if they would actually show up. My relationship with my parents had been strained for years, ever since I chose computer science over the pre-med track they had demanded. My younger brother Kevin was supportive but caught in the middle, while my grandmother Lily had always been my only true advocate in the family. When I spotted them in the 3rd row, I felt a familiar mixture of hope and dread. My mother wore her signature black business suit and pearl necklace, the outfit she reserved for important occasions where she needed to project success and control. My father sat rigidly beside her, constantly checking his phone with the same impatient energy he brought to every family gathering. Kevin waved enthusiastically when he caught my eye, and Grandma Lily blew me a small kiss that made my heart squeeze with affection. The ceremony proceeded normally through the opening remarks and departmental recognitions. When they announced the computer science graduates, I felt a surge of genuine pride despite my family's lukewarm support for my chosen field. I had worked harder than any student I knew, supporting myself financially while maintaining a near-perfect GPA, and completing 2 significant internships with tech companies. As my name was called and I walked across the stage to receive my diploma, I searched the audience for my family's face. The dean shook my hand warmly and congratulated me on my academic achievements, mentioning my award for excellence in cybersecurity research. For a brief moment I allowed myself to believe that maybe, finally, my parents would acknowledge that I had chosen the right path. The trouble started during the reception in the university's main lobby. I was talking with Dr. Martinez, my favorite professor, about potential graduate school opportunities when I heard my mother's voice rising above the crowd. She was speaking to another parent, but her tone carried that sharp edge I knew meant trouble was brewing. Rebecca has always been stubborn about following practical advice, my mother was saying to a woman I didn't recognize. We tried to guide her toward medicine, a respectable career that would provide stability and prestige, but she insisted on this computer nonsense instead. I excused myself from Dr. Martinez and moved closer, hoping I was misunderstanding the situation. The woman my mother was speaking to looked uncomfortable, glancing around as if searching for an escape route. "I'm sure computer science offers good opportunities," the woman said diplomatically. "Technology is so important these days." My mother laughed, but it was cold and dismissive. "That's what Rebecca keeps telling us, but what kind of career is it really? Sitting in front of a screen all day, dealing with machines instead of people. It's not a profession for someone with real ambition or intelligence." The conversation around them began to quiet as other families noticed the tension. I felt my cheeks burning with embarrassment, but I couldn't seem to move away from the unfolding scene. "Catherine," my father said quietly, placing a hand on her arm, "perhaps we should discuss this at home." "No, Robert," my mother said, shaking off his touch. I'm tired of pretending to be proud of Rebecca's choices when she's clearly wasting her potential. She could have been a doctor, could have made something meaningful of her life, but instead she chose to play with computers like a child. Martinez had followed me and was now standing beside me, his expression growing concerned as he realized what was happening. Several of my classmates were beginning to stare, and I could see some of them pulling out their phones. Mrs. Chen? Martinez said, stepping forward with admirable courage. Rebecca is one of our most accomplished graduates. Her research in cybersecurity has already attracted attention from several major companies. My mother turned toward him with the same icy stare she used on difficult patients. And you are? Dr. Martinez, Rebecca's thesis advisor. I've been working in this field for 15 years, and I can assure you that your daughter has exceptional talent and a very bright future ahead of her. Talent? My mother's voice was getting louder, drawing more attention from the surrounding crowd. Dr. Martinez, let me explain something to you about my daughter. Rebecca has always taken the easy path, always chosen what she thought would require the least effort. Computer science isn't a real challenge compared to medicine. It's where people go when they don't have the discipline for serious academic work. The reception hall was becoming quieter as more people turned to watch the confrontation. I could see university staff members moving closer, clearly uncertain about how to handle the situation. My brother Kevin looked mortified, while Grandma Lily was shaking her head in dismay. Furthermore, my mother continued, her voice now carrying across the entire room, Rebecca has never shown the kind of dedication or intelligence required for truly demanding work. She's always been average at best, and this degree doesn't change that fundamental limitation. Dr. Martinez looked stunned. Mrs. Chen, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Rebecca graduated in the top 5% of her class. Her cybersecurity research has been groundbreaking, and she's already received job offers from companies like Microsoft and Google. Job offers that she probably exaggerated or misrepresented. My mother shot back. Rebecca has a history of inflating her accomplishment. The truth is that she's chosen a field that looks impressive to people who don't understand it, but it's really just an expensive way to avoid real responsibility. I found my voice at last, though it came out weaker than I intended. Mom, please stop. She turned toward me with an expression I had seen countless times throughout my childhood, the look she gave patients who questioned her expertise. Rebecca, I'm simply being honest about your limitations. You've spent 4 years and accumulated significant debt pursuing something that will never lead to the kind of success our family expects. That's enough, Grandma Lily said firmly, moving to stand beside me. Catherine, you're embarrassing yourself and your daughter. I'm stating facts, my mother replied. Rebecca is worthless when it comes to making practical decisions about her future. She's always been a disappointment in that regard, and getting a degree in playing with computers doesn't change that reality. The word worthless hit me like a physical blow. The reception hall had gone completely silent except for the soft hum of air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic outside. Hundreds of people were staring at us, including my professors, classmates, and their family. Someone was definitely recording this with their phone, and I could already imagine it spreading across social media. Catherine, my father said again, more urgently this time, that's enough, but my mother wasn't finished. Robert, stop protecting her from the truth. Rebecca needs to understand that her choices have consequences. She's wasted 4 years of her life and our family's reputation on something that will never amount to anything meaningful. She's worthless at planning for the future, and this degree is just expensive proof of that fact. I looked around at all the faces staring at me with mixtures of shock, pity, and secondhand embarrassment. Dr. Martinez looked like he wanted to say something but couldn't find words. Kevin was covering his face with his hands. Grandma Lily had tears in her eyes. You know what, Mom? I said, my voice growing stronger as anger began to replace humiliation. You're absolutely right. I am worthless to you and this family. I always have been, and I always will be, because nothing I accomplish will ever be good enough for your impossible standard. I pulled off the graduation cap I was still wearing and set it on the nearest table. Consider this my formal resignation from trying to earn your approval. I'm done. I walked straight through the crowd toward the exit, leaving behind my family, my professors, and the diploma I had worked so hard to earn. The sound of my heels clicking on the tile floor seemed impossibly loud in the stunned silence that followed my departure. I made it to the parking garage before the tears started. 4 years of sacrifice, of working multiple jobs while maintaining perfect grades, of choosing a field I was passionate about despite my family's disapproval, and it had all led to this moment of complete public humiliation. I fumbled with my car keys, desperate to get away from the campus and find somewhere private to fall apart. That's when I noticed the man standing next to my car. He was probably in his late 30s, wearing a charcoal gray suit that looked both professional and slightly worn, like someone who worked hard but didn't have unlimited resources for wardrobe updates. His hair was dark brown with just a touch of gray at the temples, and he had the kind of alert, observant eyes that seemed to notice everything. What struck me most was that he didn't look surprised to see me, despite the fact that I was clearly upset and fleeing what should have been a celebration. "Rebecca Chen?" he asked, straightening up as I approached. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand, suddenly self-conscious about how I must look after my mother's public attack. "Yes, but if you're a reporter or someone who saw what just happened in there, I really don't want to talk right now." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a leather wallet, flipping it open to reveal a badge and official identification. "Agent Marcus Williams, Federal Bureau of Investigation. I've been waiting to speak with you." My first reaction was complete confusion. People like me didn't have conversations with FBI agents. My second thought was that this had to be connected to my cybersecurity research somehow, though I couldn't imagine what aspect of my academic work would interest federal law enforcement. FBI, I repeated, looking from his credentials to his face. "I don't understand. What could the FBI want with me?" Agent Williams glanced around the parking garage, noting the steady stream of families leaving the graduation ceremony. "Is there somewhere private we could talk? I think you'll find this conversation very relevant to what just happened upstairs." "You saw that?" I asked, feeling the humiliation wash over me again. "I did," he said, and his voice was kinder than I expected. "I'm sorry you had to experience that, but I have a feeling what your mother just put you through might actually be the motivation you need to hear what I have to tell you." There was something in his tone that made me pause. This wasn't a coincidental meeting. Agent Williams had been waiting for me specifically, and somehow my mother's public breakdown was connected to whatever he wanted to discuss. "What's this about?" I asked, crossing my arms defensively. "Your family's business operations," he said carefully, "and some very sophisticated criminal activities that we believe have been going on for several years." I felt a chill run down my spine despite the mild Oregon weather. "What kind of criminal activity?" Agent Williams studied my face carefully, as if trying to determine how much I could handle. "How much do you know about your father's import business, Rebecca?" "Almost nothing," I said immediately. "He's never included me in any business discussion. I know he imports goods from Asia, but that's about it. He's always said it was too complicated for me to understand." "What about your mother's medical practice? Have you ever noticed anything unusual about her patient records or billing procedure?" I shook my head, feeling increasingly confused and alarmed. "She's never let me near her office files. She says patient confidentiality prevents her from discussing her work with family members." "That's what we suspected," Agent Williams said, nodding, "which is why I need to talk to you. Rebecca, we've been investigating your parents for money laundering, healthcare fraud, and several other federal crimes for almost a year. We know they're running a sophisticated operation, but we need someone with your technical skills to help us prove it." The words hit me like a truck. Money laundering, healthcare fraud, federal crimes. My parents, the successful professionals who had always demanded perfection from me, were apparently criminals. "You think my parents are criminals?" I asked, though even as I said it, pieces were starting to fall into place. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The expensive lifestyle that never quite matched their declared income. The way my father would end phone conversations abruptly when I walked into the room. The strange computer equipment I had occasionally seen in his home office. "You don't think, Rebecca." "I know," Agent Williams said. "The question is whether you're willing to help us prove it." I looked back toward the building where my graduation reception was still ongoing. Through the windows, I could see my mother probably still holding court, likely explaining to anyone who would listen why she was justified in humiliating me. My father would be standing nearby, nodding along as he always did. Kevin would be trying to smooth things over, playing the role of the perfect son as usual. "What exactly would you need me to do?" I asked. Agent Williams's expression remained professional, but I caught a hint of satisfaction in his eyes. "We need someone to infiltrate their computer systems and gather evidence of their financial crimes. Your cybersecurity background makes you uniquely qualified for this kind of investigation." "You want me to hack my own parents?" I asked, the reality of what he was suggesting beginning to sink in. "I want you to use your legitimate access to their home systems to gather evidence of federal crimes," he corrected. "You live in their house, you understand their routines, and you have the technical skills to recover deleted files and trace digital transactions. Most importantly, after today, you have every reason to want the truth about who they really are." The irony wasn't lost on me. My mother had just called my computer skills worthless, and here was an FBI agent telling me they were exactly what law enforcement needed to investigate her criminal activities. "What kind of evidence are you looking for?" I asked. "Financial records that show discrepancies between their reported income and actual lifestyle. Communication records that reveal coordination with other criminal organizations. Medical billing records that show fraudulent charges to insurance companies. Digital evidence of money being moved through offshore accounts." He paused. "Rebecca, we believe your parents have been stealing millions of dollars over the past several years." The magnitude of what he was describing began to sink in. This wasn't just about my family having questionable business practices. This was about them systematically defrauding the government, insurance companies, and possibly their own customers. "What happens to me if I help you?" I asked. "You'll be protected as a cooperating witness," Agent Williams assured me. "You'll have immunity for any unknowing involvement you might have had in their activities. And when we make arrests, we'll ensure your safety and help you establish a new life away from your family if necessary." I thought about what that meant. No matter how this investigation ended, my relationship with my parents would be permanently destroyed. But after today's humiliation, I realized that relationship had never been healthy anyway. They had never valued me as a person, only seen me as a disappointment who didn't meet their impossible expectations. "How long would this take?" I asked. "That depends on how quickly we can gather sufficient evidence," Agent Williams said. "It could be weeks or months." "But Rebecca, every day they continue operating, they're stealing money and potentially harming people who trust them with their healthcare and business relationships." "I need time to think about this," I said. Agent Williams reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. It was plain white with just his name and a phone number printed in simple black letters. "Take all the time you need. But remember that your mother just proved exactly how little she values you or your ability. Meanwhile, the FBI is asking for your help because we recognize how valuable your skills really are." He started to walk toward his own car, then turned back. "Rebecca, your education isn't worthless. It's going to be the key to bringing justice to people who have been hurting others for years." I stood in that parking garage for a long time after Agent Williams left, staring at his business card and trying to process everything that had happened. In the span of 2 hours, I had gone from being a proud college graduate to a publicly humiliated daughter to a potential FBI informant. My phone started buzzing with text messages and social media notifications. Word of my mother's outburst was already spreading online, with several people having recorded the confrontation and shared it with their network. The comments ranged from supportive to pitying to cruelly amused, but they all reinforced the same reality: my humiliation was now public record. Instead of going home to face my family, I drove to a small coffee shop near my apartment and sat in the corner with Agent Williams's business card, trying to make sense of everything I had learned. My parents, the successful professionals who had always demanded perfection from me, were apparently sophisticated criminals. My computer skills, which my mother had just called worthless, were exactly what the FBI needed to investigate their crime. The more I thought about it, the more Agent Williams's words resonated. I had always known something felt off about my family's finances, but I had attributed it to successful business practices rather than criminal activity. Now, with the lens of suspicion, so many things made sense. The way my father insisted on handling all computer maintenance personally, the expensive lifestyle that seemed to exceed what their practices should have supported, the way both parents became defensive whenever I asked questions about their work. My phone rang, interrupting my thought. The caller ID showed Kevin's name. "Rebecca, where are you?" My brother's voice was worried. "Mom is really upset that you left, and Dad wants to talk to you." "I think I've heard enough from Mom for one lifetime," I said. "She didn't mean it the way it sounded," Kevin said quickly. "You know how she gets when she's stressed about work. The practice has been under a lot of pressure lately, and she's just taking it out on the wrong person. She called me worthless in front of 4,000 people. Kevin, she meant every single word." There was a pause on the other end. "Look, why don't you come home and we can talk about this as a family? Maybe there's a way to work things out." After I hung up, I realized that Kevin's call had helped me make my decision. My family would continue to treat me as a disappointment, no matter what I accomplished. But the FBI was offering me a chance to use my skills for something that actually mattered. They were asking me to help protect innocent people from criminals who happened to be my parents. I picked up Agent Williams's business card and dialed his number. He answered immediately, as if he had been expecting my call. "Agent Williams," I said. "This is Rebecca Chen. I've made my decision. I want to help." "I was hoping you'd say that," he replied. "Can you meet me tomorrow morning? We have a lot to discuss before you go home and start gathering evidence." "What exactly am I getting myself into?" I asked. "Justice," he said simply. "You're getting yourself into justice, Rebecca, and you're going to discover that your mother was completely wrong about your work." The next morning, I met Agent Williams at a small diner in Southeast Portland, far from my family's neighborhood and anyone who might recognize us. He had chosen a booth in the back corner with a clear view of the entrance, and he was already reviewing files when I arrived. "How are you feeling?" he asked as I slid into the seat across from him. "Scared," I answered honestly, "and angry, and determined to find out the truth about my family." "Good," he said. "Those emotions will keep you focused and careful." Over the next 3 hours, Agent Williams outlined the scope of the FBI's investigation into my parents' criminal activities. They suspected my father of using his import business to launder money for criminal organizations, bringing in cash through fake invoices and inflated shipping costs. My mother was believed to be billing insurance companies for procedures she never performed, using fake patient identities and stolen medical information. "The beauty of their system," Agent Williams explained, "is that both operations look legitimate on the surface. Your father appears to be running a successful import business, and your mother seems to have a thriving medical practice. But the financial patterns don't match the reality of their operations." He handed me a folder containing copies of public records related to both businesses. "Study these tonight. Look for inconsistencies, anything that doesn't make sense. When you get access to their personal computers, you'll be able to compare what they're reporting publicly with what they're actually doing." "What if they suspect something?" I asked. "They won't," he said confidently. "You're their daughter, they think you're technically incompetent, and they're dealing with the fallout from yesterday's public scene. They'll be focused on damage control, not watching for signs that you're investigating." I looked through the papers he had given me, noting several financial discrepancies that seemed obvious even at first glance. "How long has this been going on?" "We think at least 5 years, possibly longer. Your parents have built their entire lifestyle around fraud, Rebecca. Every luxury they've enjoyed, every advantage they've had over legitimate competitors, it's all been stolen from insurance companies, taxpayers, and honest businesses." The scope of their crimes was staggering. This wasn't just about my parents being criminal. This was about them systematically corrupting their professional fields, stealing money from people who trusted them, and living a lie that had fooled everyone in their social circle. "What happens when this investigation is over?" I asked. "Your parents will be arrested and prosecuted for federal crimes," Agent Williams said. "If convicted, they'll face significant prison time. Their assets will be seized to pay restitution to their victims, and you'll be free to build a life based on truth instead of lies. I thought about what that meant. My entire understanding of my family, my childhood, my place in the world would have to be reconstructed around the reality that my parents were sophisticated criminals who had been living a completely false life. When do I start? I asked. Tonight, Agent Williams said. Go home, act normal, and begin documenting everything you can access on their computer systems. We'll provide you with secure communication tools and software to help you copy files without leaving traces. He handed me a small device that looked like a regular USB drive. This contains forensic software that will allow you to recover deleted files and create hidden copies of important documents. It also has encrypted communication tools, so you can safely report your findings. How can you be sure I'll find evidence? I asked. Agent Williams smiled for the first time since I'd met him. Because your mother just proved how much she underestimates your ability. She thinks you're worthless with computers, which means she has no idea what you're actually capable of discovering. I left the diner with a clear mission and the tools I needed to investigate my own family for federal crime. As I drove home to face my parents for the first time since yesterday's humiliation, I realized that my mother's public attack had actually freed me to see them clearly for the first time in my life. She had called me worthless, but Agent Williams had shown me that I was exactly what law enforcement needed to bring justice to people who had been stealing and lying for years. My computer science education, which she had dismissed as playing with machines, was about to become the weapon that brought down their entire criminal operation. That evening I sat in my childhood bedroom, surrounded by the remnants of a life built on lies, and began the most important work I had ever done. My parents thought I was upstairs sulking about yesterday's confrontation. They had no idea I was about to uncover evidence that would send them to federal prison and reveal the true scope of their crimes to the world. My mother had called me worthless at my graduation, but I was about to prove that sometimes the biggest disappointments become the most dangerous opponent. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of careful deception and mounting horror, as I uncovered the true scope of my parents' criminal enterprise. Every evening I would return to my childhood home and play the role of the chastened daughter, apologizing for my dramatic exit from graduation and expressing interest in rebuilding our family relationship. Meanwhile, I was systematically infiltrating every digital device in the house and documenting evidence of crimes that stretched back nearly a decade. The first breakthrough came on a Tuesday night when I finally cracked my father's supposedly secure home office computer. He had installed what he thought was military-grade encryption, but my cybersecurity training had taught me to recognize the vulnerabilities in older systems. Using the forensic tools Agent Williams had provided, I was able to recover thousands of deleted files that painted a picture of systematic fraud that exceeded even the FBI's initial estimate. My father's import business was indeed a sophisticated money laundering operation, but it was far more complex than Agent Williams had described. Robert Chen wasn't just washing money for criminal organizations, he was actively coordinating with drug cartels, arms dealers, and human trafficking networks across 3 continents. The shipping containers that arrived monthly at the port of Portland contained far more than the consumer electronics and textiles listed on the customs document. I found detailed spreadsheets tracking payments to corrupt customs officials, schedules coordinating with ships that never appeared in official port records, and communication logs with people whose names appeared on federal watch lists. My father had built an entire shadow infrastructure for moving both goods and money through legitimate shipping channels, using his reputation as a successful businessman to avoid scrutiny from law enforcement. The medical fraud was equally extensive and somehow more personally disturbing. My mother had been billing Medicare and private insurance companies for elaborate surgical procedures that existed only on paper, using the identities of elderly patients who were either deceased or suffering from dementia. She had created an entire network of fake medical records, forged specialist referrals, and phantom follow-up appointments that generated millions of dollars in fraudulent claims. What made it worse was discovering that some of the patients whose identities she had stolen were people I knew. Mrs. Patterson, the elderly woman who lived next door and had always given me cookies during elementary school, had supposedly received complex cardiac surgery according to my mother's billing records, despite being in a nursing home with advanced Alzheimer's disease. The violation felt personal and sickening in a way that financial crimes against anonymous insurance companies somehow did. But the most shocking discovery came when I accessed my mother's encrypted patient database and found files that had nothing to do with dermatology. She was selling prescription medications on the black market, writing fake prescriptions for highly addictive painkillers and anxiety medications that were then distributed through street-level dealers. The medical practice that had made her a respected member of the community was actually a sophisticated drug distribution operation disguised as legitimate healthcare. I spent hours each night copying files to encrypted drives, photographing documents, and building a comprehensive map of their criminal activities. The USB device Agent Williams had given me worked flawlessly, allowing me to recover deleted emails, trace digital financial transactions, and access password-protected files without leaving any traces of my presence in their systems. The hardest part wasn't the technical challenges or even the risk of discovery. It was continuing to live in the same house with people I was actively investigating, pretending to care about their daily concerns while documenting evidence that would send them to prison for decades. Every family dinner became an exercise in acting normal while my parents discussed their criminal activities in coded language they assumed I was too naive to understand. My father would receive phone calls in Mandarin and Cantonese, languages he had never taught me, discussing shipping schedules and payment arrangements. My mother would review patient files at the kitchen table, making notes about procedures and billing codes that I now knew corresponded to fraudulent claims worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. They operated their criminal empire with the casual efficiency of people who had been breaking federal laws for so long that it had become routine. Kevin remained oblivious to everything, focused on his senior year of high school and college applications. Watching him interact normally with our parents while I knew the truth about their activities was like living in two different realities simultaneously. He would ask Dad for advice about business school, and seek Mom's guidance about planning for medical school, completely unaware that both parents were career criminals who had built their success on fraud and violence. Grandma Lily was more perceptive. She had always been suspicious of my parents' rapid rise in wealth and social status, and I caught her watching them with increasingly worried expressions during family gatherings. When she asked me privately if everything was all right at home, I had to fight the urge to tell her everything I had discovered. Instead, I assured her that I was fine and suggested she might want to spend more time at her own apartment rather than staying over so frequently. Agent Williams and I communicated through encrypted messages several times each week, with me providing regular updates on my findings and him offering guidance on which areas to focus my investigation. He was particularly interested in the international aspects of my father's money laundering operation and the prescription drug trafficking network my mother had established. Both crimes fell under federal jurisdiction and carried lengthy mandatory sentences that would ensure my parents spent the rest of their lives in prison. The investigation reached a critical point when I discovered that my parents were planning to liquidate their entire operation and flee the country. While accessing my father's email late one night, I found correspondence with lawyers in the Cayman Islands discussing the transfer of assets to offshore accounts and the establishment of new identities for the family. They were planning to disappear within 6 weeks, taking their stolen money and leaving behind the patients, business partners, and community members they had been defrauding for years. The urgency of the situation forced me to take bigger risks in gathering evidence. I began accessing their systems during daytime hours when they were at work, using sophisticated hacking techniques to penetrate the encrypted servers where they stored their most sensitive criminal records. I discovered detailed plans for their escape, including fake passports, purchased property in non-extradition countries, and arrangements for moving nearly $40 million in stolen money to accounts they had established under assumed names. What disturbed me most was realizing that their escape plan included Kevin but made no provision for me. Even in their criminal activities, they saw me as expendable, someone who could be left behind to face questions from law enforcement, while they started new lives in countries where they could never be prosecuted for their crime. The graduation humiliation had been genuine, They truly considered me worthless even as they planned to abandon me to deal with the consequences of their actions. I also discovered that they had been monitoring my activities more closely than I realized. My father had installed tracking software on my car and hidden cameras in my bedroom, ostensibly for security purposes but actually to ensure that I wasn't discovering anything about their criminal operation. The violation of privacy was complete and systematic, reinforcing my determination to see them face justice for everything they had done. The breakthrough that would ultimately bring down their entire operation came when I found my mother's backup files for her prescription drug trafficking network. She had been careless about deleting sensitive information from her personal laptop, and I was able to recover detailed records of every fake prescription she had written, every dealer she had supplied, and every patient identity she had stolen for insurance fraud. The files included photographs of the prescription pads she had forged, recordings of phone conversations with street-level dealers, and financial records showing exactly how much money she had made from selling medications that were supposed to treat legitimate patients. She had been operating as a high-level drug dealer while maintaining her reputation as a respected medical professional, using her legitimate practice as cover for criminal activities that had contributed to the opioid epidemic devastating communities across Oregon. I spent an entire weekend copying and organizing all the evidence I had gathered over the previous month, creating a comprehensive digital archive that documented every aspect of my parents' criminal enterprise. The files filled multiple encrypted drives and included thousands of documents, recordings, photographs, and financial records that painted a complete picture of systematic fraud and corruption spanning nearly a decade. When I finally contacted Agent Williams to arrange a meeting to hand over the evidence, I realized that I had fundamentally changed during the weeks of investigation. The naive young woman who had been humiliated at graduation had become someone capable of sophisticated undercover work and digital forensics. I had discovered skills and strength I never knew I possessed, ironically proving that my education and technical abilities were far from worthless. The meeting was scheduled for the following Wednesday at a secure federal facility in downtown Portland. Agent Williams explained that once I turned over the evidence, events would move quickly. Search warrants would be executed simultaneously at my parents' home, medical practice, and business offices. Federal agents would seize all their computers, financial records, and communication devices. My parents would be arrested and charged with multiple federal crimes carrying sentences that would effectively mean life in prison. "Are you ready for this?" Agent Williams asked during our final phone conversation before the evidence handover. "I've been ready since the moment my mother called me worthless in front of 4,000 people," I replied. "But Agent Williams, there's something else you need to know. They're planning to flee the country in less than a month. If we don't act soon, they'll disappear with $40 million and never face justice for any of this." "$40 million?" His voice sharpened with interest. "Rebecca, you've uncovered something much bigger than we initially suspected. This isn't just about healthcare fraud and money laundering anymore. We're looking at a major international criminal conspiracy." The weight of what I had discovered settled over me fully for the first time. My parents weren't just white-collar criminals who had gotten greedy. They were major players in an international network of fraud, drug trafficking, and money laundering that had hurt countless innocent people. The prestigious medical practice and successful import business were elaborate facades covering criminal activities that stretched across multiple countries and involved partnerships with some of the most dangerous organizations in the world. As I prepared for the final phase of the investigation, I couldn't help reflecting on the irony of my situation. My mother had publicly declared that my computer science education was worthless, and that I would never amount to anything meaningful. In reality, my technical skills had enabled me to uncover and document one of the most sophisticated criminal operations the FBI had investigated in recent years. The daughter she had dismissed as a failure was about to bring down her entire criminal empire using exactly the abilities she had mocked. The night before I was scheduled to meet with Agent Williams, I sat in my childhood bedroom for what I knew would be the last time. By the end of the week, my parents would be in federal custody, our house would be seized as evidence, and my family as I had known it would cease to exist. Kevin would have to rebuild his life around the reality that both parents were career criminals. Grandma Lily would be devastated, but not entirely surprised, and I would finally be free from a family that had never valued me anyway. I looked around the room that had been my sanctuary during years of trying to earn approval from parents who were incapable of giving. The academic awards, computer equipment, and programming books that had once represented my hopes for the future now seemed like artifacts from a different person's life. I was no longer the insecure young woman who had desperately wanted her family's acceptance. I had become someone who could gather evidence against federal criminals while living in their house and sharing meals at their table. My phone buzzed with a text message from Kevin asking if I wanted to watch a movie with the family. The normalcy of the request felt surreal given that I was carrying encrypted drives containing evidence that would destroy our parents' lives and send them to prison for decades. I texted back that I was too tired and needed to get some sleep before an important meeting the next day. As I lay in bed that night, I thought about the path that had led me to this moment. If my mother hadn't humiliated me at graduation, I might have continued living as the disappointed daughter, never questioning why our family's lifestyle didn't match their declared income or why both parents were so secretive about their professional activity. Her cruelty had inadvertently freed me to see them clearly and discover the truth about who they really were. The graduation ceremony that had ended in public humiliation was about to become the beginning of the biggest criminal investigation in Oregon's recent history. My worthless computer skills were going to send two major criminals to federal prison and dismantle an international money laundering and drug trafficking operation. And I was finally going to prove to myself, if not to my family, that I was capable of something truly meaningful. The next morning, I dressed carefully in a professional outfit and gathered the encrypted drives containing months of evidence against my own parents. As I prepared to leave the house for my meeting with Agent Williams, I passed my father's home office, where he was reviewing shipping schedules for containers that I knew contained far more than consumer electronics. In the kitchen, my mother was updating patient files for procedures that existed only in her fraudulent billing system. They both looked up as I passed, offering the kind of casual morning greetings that family members exchange without thinking. Neither of them had any idea that their youngest daughter, the one they considered such a disappointment, was carrying evidence that would expose their crimes to federal prosecutors and ensure they spent the rest of their lives in prison. "Have a good day at your meeting," my mother said absently, focused on her fake medical records. "I will," I replied, and for the first time in years I meant it completely. Walking out of that house for what I knew would be the final time as their daughter, I felt something I had never experienced before: genuine pride in myself and my accomplishment. Not because I had earned anyone else's approval, but because I had used my education and skills to seek justice for the countless people my parents had victimized over the years. My mother had called me worthless, but I was about to prove that sometimes the biggest disappointments become the most dangerous opponents when they finally decide to fight back. The federal building in downtown Portland loomed against the gray morning sky like a fortress of justice, its concrete and glass facade reflecting my determination as I walked through the security checkpoint with encrypted drives hidden in my laptop bag. Agent Williams met me in the lobby, his expression more serious than I had ever seen it, and guided me through a maze of corridors to a secure conference room where 3 other agents were waiting with equipment I recognized as high-end digital forensics tools. "Rebecca, I want you to meet Agent Sarah Martinez from our cybercrime division and Agent David Park from financial crimes," Williams said as we entered the room. "They'll be reviewing the evidence you've gathered and preparing the warrants we need to move forward." Agent Martinez was a woman in her early 40s with sharp eyes and an immediate understanding of technical complexities that put me at ease. Agent Park appeared younger but carried himself with the confidence of someone who had spent years tracking sophisticated financial crime. Both agents looked at me with something approaching reverence when Williams explained that I had gathered evidence against my own parents while living in their house for nearly a month. "What Rebecca has accomplished is unprecedented," Williams told his colleagues as I began connecting my encrypted drives to their secure system. "She's documented a criminal enterprise that spans multiple federal jurisdictions and involves international trafficking networks we've been trying to penetrate for years." The next 6 hours felt like the most intense final exam of my life as I walked the federal agents through every piece of evidence I had gathered. We started with my father's money laundering operation, reviewing the shipping records, financial transfers and communication logs that revealed the true scope of his criminal activity. Agent Park took detailed notes as I explained how Robert Chen had built relationships with corrupt officials at the Port of Portland, established shell companies in 12 different countries, and coordinated with criminal organizations that specialized in moving both money and contraband through legitimate shipping channels. "Your father isn't just washing money for other criminals," Agent Park explained as he reviewed the financial record. "He's operating as a broker for international criminal networks, taking percentages from drug cartels, arms dealers and human trafficking operations. The import business is essentially a front for one of the most sophisticated money laundering operations we've ever encountered." Agent Martinez was equally impressed by the evidence I had gathered about my mother's prescription drug trafficking network. The recovered files from her laptop revealed a systematic operation that had distributed hundreds of thousands of doses of illegal medications through street-level dealers across the Pacific Northwest. She had been writing fake prescriptions using stolen patient identities, billing insurance companies for phantom medical procedures, and coordinating with drug dealers who sold the medications to addicts and resellers throughout Oregon and Washington. Dr. Catherine Chen has been operating as a high-level drug distributor while maintaining her reputation as a respected medical professional, Martinez said as she reviewed the evidence. "She's contributed directly to the opioid epidemic while profiting from the suffering of people who trusted her with their health care. The combination of medical fraud and drug trafficking carries federal sentences that could easily exceed 20 years. But the agents were most interested in the evidence I had discovered about my parents' planned escape from the country. The offshore banking records, fake passport applications, and property purchases in non-extradition countries revealed a sophisticated exit strategy that would have allowed them to disappear with tens of millions of dollars in stolen money. They had been planning their escape for over a year, establishing new identities and financial accounts that would have made them virtually impossible to locate once they left the United States. "This changes everything," Williams said as he reviewed the escape plan. "We can't wait for a traditional investigation timeline. If your parents disappear, we'll lose the opportunity to prosecute them and recover the money they've stolen from their victim." The agents explained that they would need to execute coordinated raids on my parents' home, medical practice, and business offices within 48 hours. Federal prosecutors were already reviewing the evidence to prepare criminal charges, and other FBI field offices were being notified about the international aspects of the case. The investigation I had conducted from my childhood bedroom was about to become a multi-jurisdictional federal operation involving dozens of agents and prosecutors. "Rebecca, you need to understand that once we execute these search warrants, there's no going back," Williams told me as the meeting concluded. "Your parents will be arrested and charged with federal crimes that carry mandatory minimum sentences. Your family as you've known it will cease to exist." My family ceased to exist the moment my mother called me worthless in front of 4,000 people, I replied. "Everything since then has just been me discovering the truth about who they really are." The agents provided me with a secure phone and detailed instructions for the next phase of the operation. I would return home and maintain normal behavior while they prepared the raid. When the arrests occurred, I would be taken into protective custody to ensure my safety and provide additional testimony about the evidence I had gathered. Federal prosecutors would need my expertise to explain the technical aspects of the crimes and help them understand the sophisticated methods my parents had used to hide their criminal activity. That evening, I sat through what I knew would be my last family dinner, listening to my parents discuss their daily activities while knowing that federal agents were preparing to arrest them within 24 hours. My father mentioned a shipping container arriving from Hong Kong that I knew contained far more than the electronics listed on the customs document. My mother talked about several new patients she was treating for chronic pain conditions that I recognized as cover stories for prescription drug trafficking. Kevin was excited about college applications and kept asking our parents for advice about choosing schools and planning his future. The irony was devastating. He was seeking guidance from people who would be in federal custody before his applications were even submitted. I wanted to warn him about what was coming, but Agent Williams had been clear that operational security was essential for the safety of all the federal agents involved in the raid. Grandma Lily joined us for dinner as she often did on weekends, and I caught her watching my parents with the same suspicious expression I had noticed in recent weeks. She asked pointed questions about their work and finances that made both my mother and father uncomfortable, though they deflected her concerns with practiced ease. When she hugged me goodbye that evening, she whispered that I should call her soon because she sensed that difficult times were ahead for our family. After dinner, I retreated to my bedroom and began packing a small bag with essential items, following Agent Williams's instructions to prepare for immediate relocation once the arrests occurred. The secure phone he had given me remained silent, but I knew that federal agents were working throughout the night to finalize search warrants and coordinate the simultaneous raids that would begin the next morning. I spent hours reviewing the evidence I had gathered, making sure I understood every detail that federal prosecutors would need me to explain during the legal proceeding. The scope of my parents' criminal activities was staggering. They had stolen millions of dollars, contributed to drug addiction and overdose deaths, corrupted public officials, and violated the trust of patients who had relied on my mother for legitimate medical care. The graduation humiliation that had seemed like the worst moment of my life had actually freed me to uncover crimes that affected thousands of innocent people. The secure phone finally rang at 6:30 the next morning. Agent Williams's voice was tense but controlled as he informed me that the raids would begin in 30 minutes. Federal agents were already positioned outside our house, my mother's medical practice, and my father's business office. Additional teams were standing by at the Port of Portland and several other locations where evidence was stored. "Stay in your bedroom and don't come out until we knock on your door," Williams instructed. "This is going to be intense and we need to ensure your safety while we arrest your parents and secure the evidence." I dressed quickly and positioned myself by my bedroom window, which offered a partial view of our front yard and the street beyond. At exactly 7 o'clock, black SUVs appeared from multiple directions and stopped in front of our house. Federal agents in tactical gear emerged from the vehicles and approached our front door while others moved to secure the perimeter and prevent any attempts to escape. The sound of the doorbell was followed immediately by loud knocking and shouting as agents identified themselves and demanded entry. I could hear my father's confused voice asking what was happening, followed by my mother's sharp tone demanding to see identification and warrant. Within minutes, the house filled with the voices of federal agents executing their search and arrest warrants. My bedroom door remained closed as instructed, but I could hear the chaos unfolding throughout the house. Agents were methodically searching every room, seizing computers and financial records while my parents protested their innocence and demanded to call their attorney. Kevin's voice rose above the others, confused and frightened as he tried to understand why federal agents were arresting our parents. The knock on my bedroom door came exactly as Agent Williams had promised. When I opened it, he was standing in the hallway with two other agents, their expressions serious but not threatening. Behind them, I could see my father being led away in handcuffs while my mother continued arguing with the agents who were reading her Miranda rights. "It's time to go, Rebecca," Williams said gently. "Your parents are being arrested and transported to federal detention facilities. Kevin is being taken to your grandmother's house and you'll be coming with us for debriefing and protective custody." As I walked through the house that had been my home for 23 years, I saw federal agents carefully documenting and seizing evidence that would be used to prosecute my parents for decades of criminal activity. Computers were being loaded into trucks, filing cabinets were being emptied, and every digital device in the house was being collected for forensic analysis. My mother saw me as I was being escorted toward the front door. Her expression changed from confusion to fury as she realized what had happened. "You did this," she hissed, her voice carrying across the chaos. "You ungrateful, worthless little traitor. You destroyed your own family." "No," I replied, stopping to face her direct. "You destroyed this family the moment you decided to become criminals. I just documented the evidence." Agent Martinez stepped between us before my mother could respond. "Dr. Chen, you need to focus on your own situation right now. Your daughter's cooperation has prevented you from fleeing the country with $40 million in stolen money." The ride to the federal building passed in surreal silence as I processed the reality that my parents were now in custody and facing charges that would likely result in life sentences. Agent Williams explained that additional arrests were being made simultaneously across multiple states as other federal agencies moved against the criminal networks my parents had been coordinating with. "Rebecca, what you've accomplished is going to have ripple effects far beyond your family's crimes. he told me as we drove through downtown Portland. The evidence you gathered has allowed us to identify and prosecute criminal organizations that have been operating for years without detection. At the federal building, I spent the rest of the day providing detailed testimony about the evidence I had gathered and the methods I had used to infiltrate my parents' computer systems. Federal prosecutors were particularly interested in the technical aspects of the crimes, and my ability to explain complex financial transactions and digital communications in terms that juries would understand. Agent Martinez walked me through the process of testifying as a government witness, explaining that my parents' cases would likely go to trial within 6 months, and that my testimony would be essential for securing convictions. The evidence I had gathered was strong enough to ensure guilty verdicts, but prosecutors wanted to be thorough in their preparation for what would certainly be high-profile trials involving sophisticated white-collar crimes. Your parents' attorneys will try to attack your credibility and motivations, Martinez warned me. They'll argue that you were motivated by anger about the graduation incident and that you violated your family's privacy for revenge rather than justice. Let them, I replied. The evidence speaks for itself. Every document, every financial record, every communication log is authentic and verifiable. My motivations don't change the fact that my parents are criminals who have been stealing money and trafficking drugs for years. Late that afternoon, Agent Williams informed me that my parents had been formally charged with money laundering, prescription drug trafficking, healthcare fraud, and conspiracy to commit international financial crime. Bond had been denied due to flight risk, meaning they would remain in federal custody until their trials. Additional charges were likely as investigators continued analyzing the evidence I had provided. What happens to Kevin? I asked, suddenly worried about my younger brother's situation. He's with your grandmother, and social services are evaluating his living arrangements, Williams explained. There's no evidence that he was aware of your parents' criminal activities, so he won't face any charge, but he'll need support dealing with the reality that both parents are going to prison. That evening, I called Kevin from the secure phone to check on his emotional state and try to explain what had happened without violating operational security requirements. He was devastated and confused, struggling to understand how the parents he had idolized could be the criminals federal agents described. I promised to visit him as soon as the immediate legal proceedings were completed and assured him that none of this was his fault. Grandma Lily was stronger than I expected when I spoke with her later that night. She admitted that she had suspected something was wrong with my parents' rapid accumulation of wealth and their secretive behavior about their professional activity. She was proud of me for having the courage to seek justice, even though it meant destroying our family structure. Rebecca, you did the right thing, she told me firmly. Your parents betrayed the trust of their patients, their community, and their own children. They deserve to face consequences for their actions. Over the following weeks, as federal investigators continued analyzing the evidence I had provided, the true scope of my parents' criminal enterprise became clear. They had been operating for nearly 8 years, stealing an estimated $60 million through various fraud schemes, while coordinating with international criminal networks responsible for drug trafficking, money laundering, and corruption of public officials. My father's import business had facilitated the entry of illegal drugs, weapons, and human trafficking victims into the United States, while generating massive profits for criminal organizations across Asia and Latin America. My mother's medical practice had distributed hundreds of thousands of doses of illegal prescription medications, while defrauding insurance companies and Medicare out of millions of dollars intended for legitimate patient care. The arrest triggered a cascade of additional investigations as federal agencies used the evidence I had gathered to identify and prosecute other members of the criminal networks my parents had been working with. Port officials, customs agents, and other medical professionals were arrested as the investigation expanded beyond my family to encompass the broader conspiracy they had participated in. Media coverage of the case was extensive, with news outlets describing it as one of the most sophisticated white-collar crime operations ever uncovered in Oregon. My identity as the whistleblower was initially protected, but court filings eventually revealed that I had provided the evidence that led to my parents' arrest. The story of the daughter who had been publicly humiliated at graduation and subsequently exposed her family's criminal empire became a national news sensation. Public reaction was mixed, with some people praising my courage in seeking justice while others criticized me for betraying my own family. Online comments ranged from supportive to vicious, but I found that I no longer cared about other people's opinions of my choices. I had used my education and skills to prevent dangerous criminals from escaping justice, regardless of the fact that those criminals happened to be my parent. The legal proceedings moved forward with surprising speed as federal prosecutors built their cases around the evidence I had provided. My parents' attorneys attempted various defense strategies, including arguing that I had violated their privacy rights and that the evidence should be excluded from trial. Federal judges consistently ruled that the evidence was legally obtained and admissible, noting that I had used my legitimate access to family computers to uncover genuine criminal activity. As the trial dates approached, I began preparing for what would certainly be intense cross-examination by defense attorneys, who would try to portray me as a vindictive daughter seeking revenge for childhood grievances. Agent Martinez helped me prepare for the psychological pressure of testifying against my own parents, while maintaining focus on the technical evidence that proved their guilt. "Remember that you're not the one who destroyed your family," Martinez reminded me during trial preparation session. "Your parents made the choice to become criminals. You made the choice to seek justice for their victim." The preliminary hearings attracted significant media attention as prosecutors outlined the scope of the criminal conspiracy and the sophisticated methods my parents had used to hide their activities. Federal agents testified about the evidence I had gathered and the international implications of the money laundering and drug trafficking operation. My parents maintained their innocence throughout the proceedings, with their attorneys arguing that they were successful professionals who had been unfairly targeted by overzealous federal investigators. However, the evidence was overwhelming, and legal experts predicted that the trials would result in lengthy prison sentences for both defendants. As I prepared to testify in the trials that would determine my parents' fate, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this point. The graduation ceremony that had ended in public humiliation had become the catalyst for uncovering one of the most significant criminal investigations in Oregon's history. My computer science education, which my mother had dismissed as worthless, had provided the skills necessary to gather evidence against sophisticated federal criminals. I was no longer the insecure young woman who had desperately sought her parents' approval. I had become someone capable of using technical expertise and moral courage to seek justice for people who had been victimized by criminals who happened to be my family members. The worthless daughter had become the key witness in a federal prosecution that would send two major criminals to prison for the rest of their lives. The federal courthouse in Portland buzzed with activity as I walked through the metal detectors for the final day of my mother's trial, 6 months after the arrests that had shattered my family and exposed one of the largest criminal conspiracies in Oregon's history. My father had already been convicted and sentenced to 35 years in federal prison after his attorneys advised him to accept a plea deal rather than face the overwhelming evidence I had helped gather. Today, my mother would learn whether her decision to fight the charges would result in an even harsher sentence. Agent Williams met me in the witness preparation room, his expression reflecting the satisfaction of someone who had seen a complex investigation reach its successful conclusion. The evidence I had provided had not only secured convictions against my parents, but had also led to the arrest and prosecution of 43 other individuals across multiple states and countries. The international criminal network they had participated in was systematically dismantled, with law enforcement agencies recovering over $100 million in stolen assets. "How are you feeling about testifying today?" Williams asked as we reviewed my notes one final time. "Ready," I replied, and I meant it completely. I've been preparing for this moment since the day she called me worthless at my graduation. The courtroom was packed with reporters, federal agents, and family members of the victims whose lives had been destroyed by my mother's prescription drug trafficking operation. I recognized several faces from news coverage of the case, including parents whose children had died from overdoses involving medications my mother had illegally distributed through her criminal network. My mother sat at the defense table wearing the same expensive business suit she had worn to my graduation, though she looked smaller somehow, diminished by months of federal custody and the weight of evidence that had proven her guilt beyond any reasonable doubt. Her attorneys had spent weeks trying to discredit my testimony and portray me as a vindictive daughter seeking revenge, but the technical evidence was irrefutable. When I was called to the witness stand for the final phase of the prosecution's case, I felt a calm determination that surprised me. This wasn't about my relationship with my parents anymore. It was about ensuring that dangerous criminals faced appropriate consequences for years of systematic fraud and violence that had harmed countless innocent people. The prosecutor, Assistant U.S. Attorney Jennifer Brooks, walked me through the key evidence I had discovered during my undercover investigation. We discussed the fake prescriptions my mother had written using stolen patient identity, the coordination with street-level dealers who distributed illegal medications throughout the Pacific Northwest, and the sophisticated methods she had used to hide her criminal activities behind the facade of a legitimate medical practice. Brooks asked, "Can you explain to the jury how your cybersecurity training enabled you to recover deleted files from your mother's computer system?" I spent 20 minutes describing the technical methods I had used to access encrypted databases, recover communications that my mother thought she had permanently deleted, and trace financial transactions that revealed the scope of her drug trafficking operation. The jury listened intently as I explained how my mother had used her medical license to write prescriptions for highly addictive medications that were then sold to dealers who distributed them to addicts and resellers across multiple states. The defense attorney's cross-examination was aggressive but ineffective. He tried to suggest that I had been motivated by personal grievances rather than genuine concern for justice, pointing to the graduation incident as evidence that I was seeking revenge against parents who had disappointed me. His strategy backfired when I calmly explained that discovering my parents were career criminals had actually vindicated my decision to pursue an education they had dismissed as worthless. "Davidson," I said to the defense attorney, "my mother called my computer science degree worthless in front of 4,000 people. Those same skills enabled me to uncover evidence that she was trafficking prescription drugs and defrauding insurance companies out of millions of dollars." The irony isn't lost on me. When Davidson tried to suggest that I had violated my parents' privacy by accessing their computer systems, I pointed out that I had used my legitimate access as a family member to discover ongoing crimes that were harming vulnerable people throughout our community. The judge sustained the prosecution's objections to most of his questions, noting that my motivations were irrelevant to the authenticity of the evidence I had gathered. The most powerful moment of my testimony came when Brooks asked me to describe the impact of discovering that my mother had stolen the identity of Miss Patterson, our elderly neighbor who suffered from Alzheimer's disease, to bill Medicare for expensive surgical procedures that had never been performed. "Mrs. Patterson used to give me cookies when I was a child," I told the jury, my voice steady despite the emotion of the memory. "She was a kind woman who trusted people and never hurt anyone. My mother stole her identity to commit fraud while Mrs. Patterson was suffering from a devastating illness. That's when I realized this wasn't just about abstract financial crime. These were real people being victimized by someone they trusted." Several jurors were visibly moved by this testimony, and I noticed my mother looking away rather than meeting my eye. Her attorneys had no effective response to the human impact of her crimes, which had affected not only insurance companies and government programs, but also individual patients whose identities had been stolen and whose trust had been violated. After my testimony concluded, I remained in the courthouse to hear the closing arguments from both sides. The prosecution painted a comprehensive picture of systematic criminal activity that had generated millions of dollars in illegal profits, while contributing to the opioid epidemic and corrupting the medical profession. The defense made a desperate attempt to portray my mother as a dedicated physician who had made poor choices but didn't deserve a lengthy prison sentence. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts: conspiracy to distribute controlled substances, healthcare fraud, money laundering, and identity theft. My mother showed no emotion as the verdicts were read, maintaining the same cold composure she had displayed throughout the trial. Sentencing was scheduled for the following month, giving the judge time to review victim impact statements and consider the appropriate punishment for crimes that had affected hundreds of people across multiple states. Federal sentencing guidelines suggested a prison term of 25 to 30 years, effectively ensuring that my mother would spend the rest of her life in federal custody. The weeks between the conviction and sentencing gave me time to reflect on the complete transformation my life had undergone since that devastating graduation ceremony. I had accepted a position with a cybersecurity consulting firm that specialized in helping law enforcement agencies investigate digital crime. My expertise in recovering deleted files and tracing encrypted communications had made me valuable to federal agencies pursuing complex financial fraud cases. Kevin had struggled initially with the reality that both parents were convicted criminals, but he had gradually begun to understand that their arrests had prevented them from causing additional harm to innocent people. He was finishing his senior year of high school while living with Grandma Lily, and we had grown closer as we supported each other through the aftermath of our family's destruction. "Do you ever regret exposing them?" Kevin asked me during one of our weekly dinners together. "Never," I replied without hesitation. "They made the choice to become criminals. I made the choice to seek justice for their victims. Those were both moral decisions, but only one of them was right." Grandma Lily had been remarkably resilient throughout the legal proceedings, often saying that she was proud of me for having the courage to do what was necessary despite the personal cost. She had testified as a character witness during my father's sentencing hearing, describing how my parents had become increasingly secretive and materialistic over the years leading up to their arrest. The media coverage of the case had made me a minor celebrity in cybersecurity circles, with several universities inviting me to speak about the intersection of digital forensics and criminal investigation. I had declined most of these opportunities, preferring to focus on my new career rather than relitigating the family drama that had led to my parents' conviction. The sentencing hearing drew even more attention than the trial itself, with news outlets describing it as the conclusion of one of the most significant white-collar crime cases in Oregon's history. Victim impact statements filled an entire morning as people described how my mother's prescription drug trafficking had affected their families and community. Sarah Martinez, whose teenage son had died from an overdose involving medications traced back to my mother's operation, gave particularly powerful testimony about the devastating impact of prescription drug trafficking on families and communities. She thanked me directly for having the courage to expose the criminal network that had contributed to her son's death. When my mother was finally brought before the judge for sentencing, she maintained her innocence and showed no remorse for her crime. Her attorney argued for leniency based on her previous contributions to the medical profession, but the judge was unmoved by these arguments given the scope and duration of her criminal activities. Judge Patricia Rodriguez said, "You violated the trust of your patients, your profession, and your community. You used your medical license to distribute dangerous drugs that contributed to addiction and death throughout the Pacific Northwest. Your crimes were sophisticated, systematic, and motivated by greed rather than any legitimate medical purpose." The judge sentenced my mother to 28 years in federal prison, ensuring that she would be nearly 80 years old before becoming eligible for release. Combined with my father's 35-year sentence, the verdicts represented complete justice for their victims and appropriate punishment for crimes that had affected thousands of people. As court officers led my mother away to begin her prison sentence, she looked directly at me for the first time since her arrest. Her expression was filled with hatred rather than regret, confirming that she still viewed me as a traitor rather than someone who had sought justice for her victim. In that moment, I felt completely free from any remaining emotional connection to someone who had never truly been a mother to me. The investigation that had begun with my graduation humiliation officially concluded with the seizure of all remaining criminal assets and the dissolution of the international network my parents had participated in. Federal agencies recovered nearly all of the stolen money, which was distributed to victims and defrauded insurance programs. The prescription drugs that had been trafficked through my mother's operation were traced and removed from circulation, potentially preventing additional overdoses and addiction cases. 6 months after my mother's sentencing, I attended my first college graduation ceremony since my own devastating experience. This time I was the guest speaker at Portland State University's cybersecurity program commencement, addressing graduates who were entering a field that had given me both the skills and the opportunity to seek justice against sophisticated criminals. "Your education is never worthless," I told the graduating class, thinking of my mother's words that had started this entire journey. The skills you've developed here will allow you to protect innocent people from criminals who use technology to hide their activity. You have the power to shine light into dark places and ensure that complex crimes don't go unpunished, simply because they're difficult to detect. After the ceremony, several graduates approached me to discuss career opportunities in digital forensics and cybersecurity investigation. I realized that my experience had not only brought justice to my parents' victims, but had also positioned me to help train the next generation of cybersecurity professionals who would protect society from increasingly sophisticated criminal threats. That evening, I had dinner with Kevin and Grandma Lily at the same restaurant where we had celebrated my original graduation before my mother's public attack. This time, the conversation was filled with genuine pride and optimism about the future rather than the tension and disappointment that had characterized our family relationships for years. "I'm proud of the woman you've become," Grandma Lily told me as we finished our meal. "You turned the worst moment of your life into an opportunity to help people and seek justice. That takes strength most people don't possess." As I drove home that night, I reflected on the complete transformation of my life over the past year. The young woman who had been publicly humiliated at graduation and called worthless by her own mother had become someone capable of conducting sophisticated undercover investigations against federal criminals. My computer science education, which had been dismissed as playing with machines, had provided the skills necessary to dismantle an international criminal conspiracy and protect countless innocent people from ongoing harm. The graduation ceremony that had ended in devastation had actually been the beginning of the most meaningful chapter of my life. My mother's cruelty had inadvertently freed me to discover who I really was and what I was capable of accomplishing when I stopped seeking approval from people who were fundamentally incapable of giving it. I now worked with federal agencies across the country, using my expertise to investigate complex financial crimes and digital fraud cases. My experience had made me one of the youngest cybersecurity consultants ever to testify before Congress about the intersection of technology and criminal investigation. The worthless daughter had become someone whose skills were sought by the highest levels of law enforcement and national security. Most importantly, I had learned that seeking justice for others was far more fulfilling than seeking approval from family members who had never deserved my respect. My parents had spent years building criminal enterprises that harmed innocent people, while I had chosen to use my education and abilities to protect those same people from sophisticated threats. The graduation humiliation that had seemed like the end of my world had actually been the beginning of a life dedicated to ensuring that complex crimes didn't go unpunished, simply because they were difficult to understand or investigate. My mother had called me worthless, but I had proven that sometimes the biggest disappointments become the most effective agents of justice when they finally decide to fight for what's right. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.